flies off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
April the 16th, 1972, these two men met in the field of combat. And we're going to hear that story firsthand this morning. All the way from Bowling Green, Kentucky, Brigadier General Dan Cherry sits next to me. He served in the U.S. Air Force for 29 years. He commanded the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing and also the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. He flew 295 combat missions in Vietnam. General Dan Cherry. And the gentleman in the red shirt here is all the way from Vietnam. He is Hong Mi. He spent 4 years in the Soviet Union learning how to fly airplanes and checking out on the MiG-21. He was presented his North Vietnamese pilot's wings by Ho Chi Minh himself. And he shot down an American F-4 just days before he got shot down, all the way from Vietnam. Please welcome Hong Mi. Sitting next to Hong Mi is Dr. Tang Huang. She is professor of Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. Welcome. The first question goes to Hong Mi. He's never been here in Oshkosh, and as a pilot, I want your what's your opinion of all this?
First time I go to Oshkosh. I cannot speak English. My translator had me. Thank you. Tôi đã dự nhiều ESO của hàng không và 2009 thì tôi dự cái ESO ở Tampa cũng tương đối lớn, nhưng tôi nghĩ rằng cái ESO lần này ở Escort có lẽ là ESO lớn nhất của Mỹ mà tôi được dự.
Hello everybody, it's my pleasure to be here today. I have attended a couple of air shows in the United States, but here this is the first time at Oshkosh, and I think Oshkosh is the biggest event.
Thank you for that. Dan, and by the way, I have permission to call him Dan. I don't go around calling general officers by their first name without permission, but he gave me that honor this morning. Dan, let's talk about your training in the Air Force.
Well, yes, Dan, please do call me Dan, and all of you too. I hope you do. The Air Force was very good to me. I think back on my 29 years with tremendously fond memories, great gratitude for the Air Force helping me to grow up as a young man and giving me tremendous opportunities to fly the very best fighter planes our Air Force had during that day, and to work with some of the very best people. It was just a wonderful experience. Not without its sacrifices, not without its challenges. In my 29 years in the Air Force, my wife and I sat on the front steps of our last Air Force house and started counting up the number of times we had moved in our time in the Air Force. And it turned out to be, in 29 years, we had moved 22 times. But it was a good life. And again, like I say, I feel very honored to have had it. I first entered the Air Force as an aviation cadet and started out as a navigator, and then shortly after that got selected for pilot training, went to pilot training in Selma, Alabama at Craig Air Force Base, and graduated, fortunately, first in my class in pilot training, and went from there to check out on the F-105 Thunder Chief. That was the airplane of my choice at the time. Went to Europe for a short assignment in the F-105, and then from there to combat in 1967. So I really had a wonderful Air Force career, again, flying the airplanes like the F-105, the F-4 Phantom that you see behind us here, and also the F-16. So again, I'm a lucky guy, no question about it. Very, very fortunate. And lucky to be here today, too.
All of us are. Hong Mi, would you describe your training in Russia in your checkout in the MiG-21?
Năm 1965, khi tôi đang học đại học kinh tế thì không quân về khám tuyển. Và tôi là một trong hai người được trúng tuyển từ 1.700 sinh viên.
In 1965, I was a freshman at the Economics University when the Air Force came to recruit pilots. And I was among two candidates selected among the 1,700 candidates.
Để chuẩn bị cho chiến tranh thì chúng tôi phải đào tạo gấp. Trong lúc chương trình đáng lẽ ra là mùa đông phải nghỉ thì chúng tôi đã phải gạt tuyết đi để cho máy bay hạ cánh, và gần như là chúng tôi thời gian huấn luyện là một gấp đôi.
Since we have urgent training, we received the flying training in the Soviet Union, and we practice flying even in winter when we have to shovel the snow in order to fly.
Trong số chúng tôi đi học ở Liên Xô cũ hồi đó là 120 người. Và sau một thời gian huấn luyện, sau gần 4 năm huấn luyện thì được 19 người tốt nghiệp MiG-21 và 30 người tốt nghiệp MiG-17. Và đến đầu năm 1968 thì tôi quay về Việt Nam để tham gia đánh nhau với đen.
Among the 120 candidates who were sent to the Soviet Union to study flying, only 19 graduated from MiG-21 training and 30 graduated from MiG-17 training. In 1968, I graduated, returning to my home country, prepared to meet with Dan.
That's great. Let's talk about the airplanes, Dan. Compare the MiG-21 to the F-4. Advantages, disadvantages for both.
Well, they were quite different airplanes, and we were just thrilled that EAA and the Warbirds in review were able to pull together two airplanes, the MiG and also the F-4. We've never had the opportunity to have both of our airplanes in the same place at the same time, but it is a remarkable comparison. The F-4 much larger, as you can see, easier to see in a combat environment, not as maneuverable really in a turning dogfight as the MiG-21, but the F-4 had better armament. We had, in the model I was flying, the F-4D, we did not have a gun, but we had radar-guided missiles, the AIM-7 Sparrow, and we also had the AIM-9 Sidewinder as our primary armament. The MiG-21, small airplane, very difficult to see, very fast, good turning airplane. One of the disadvantages was that it had very short legs. He couldn't stay airborne very long, especially if he's in afterburner. But it did carry heat-seeking ATOL guided missiles, and some of the models also had a 30-millimeter cannon. So, again, a very formidable opponent. We treated the MiG-21 with tremendous respect, and I can remember in the back of my mind, I always told myself that if I had a chance to become engaged in an intense dogfight with the MiG-21, I was going to do it on my terms. I was going to be sure I always had the advantage if I ever felt myself starting to lose the advantage in just a lethal, very formidable opponent for the F-4.
In my hand, I have this wonderful little book called My Enemy, My Friend, which is available over in the Warbird merchandise area after this presentation. You can read it in a couple of hours, but it is the most moving book I've ever read. And you need to pick it up for your library after this presentation. But now we're going to get into the mission. Dan, take it from there.
Well, on April 16th, 1972, I was a member of a flight of 4 F-4s. The call sign was Basco Flight. And for those of you who have watched the History Channel program Dogfights, you might have picked up the episode called Hell Over Hanoi when they featured our dogfight on the program. I was very flattered by that because all of you who are enthusiasts of aviation or aviators yourselves realize how difficult it is to explain the dynamics of a dogfight to anybody. I see Colonel Bud Anderson out here in the audience, and he'll probably back me up on this. It's just hard to tell people. Yes, please, Bud. Please. It's very difficult to tell someone about what happened when you were in a dogfight. Too much going on. Very dynamic environment. But in a nutshell, on April 16th, 1972, as I mentioned earlier, I was a member of Basco Flight, a flight of 4 F-4s. Our primary mission that day was to escort other F-4s that were coming from a different base in Thailand on a bombing mission. And our primary chore that day was to be sure that the enemy fighters we're not able to attack them as they're on their way to the target. The flight that we were supposed to escort had some sort of maintenance difficulty and didn't show up in time. And so my flight leader, Fred Olmsted, made a very courageous decision that we would immediately revert to our secondary mission, and that was basically trolling for MiGs up around Hanoi and searching with our radars all the known MiG bases just to see if we could pick something up. We had to make a decision quickly on that just because of our fuel state. We were starting to run low on fuel. We did not have tanker support that day dedicated to us, and so we had to be extra sensitive about it. But in any case, Fredo turned Basco flight, headed right for Hanoi. We made a couple of turns, and then suddenly on the radar, Fredo's backseater called out. His name is Stu Moss, and matter of fact, I saw him here at AirVenture just last year. But Stu said, I've got 2 blue bandits on the nose for 20. And we have all this recorded from a little tape recorder in the cockpit. Still very exciting to me when I listen to it, Dan. But again, that's when the fight really started, and we tracked them all the way down. In Fredo's airplane that morning, we had, at that time, it was very highly classified equipment called Combat Tree. And we were able to actually interrogate the MiG's radar, and our rules of engagement had been changed to allow us to fire a radar missile without visual confirmation that it was truly an enemy airplane. We had an internal rule within Basco flight and within my squadron that we would not do that. The worst thing a fighter pilot can do is to shoot down one of your buddies up there, and nothing is worth that. So we decided that we were, even though we had, legally we could have, we were going to visually confirm that anything we engaged was an actual enemy. As it turns out, we did engage 4 MiG-21s, 2 silver ones that came over head on to us, and then 2 trailers behind that, one of those being Hong Mi. As the two silver MiGs came over our head, we made a hard turn to position into their 6 o'clock. And as we did that, I was flying on the outside of the turn, and it made me fall behind in the turn, fortunately. It was at that point that Hong Mi came up from a low altitude.
You want me to hold your mic?
It's hard for a fighter pilot to talk with one hand, you know that. I think I'm okay. But as we made the turn, Hong Mi came up a little prematurely. Second element, I saw them, turned toward him, he saw us, and then broke away and went into a cloud bank. And at that point, I thought we'd lost him for sure. I never thought we'd see him again. Still trying to search for him and get a lock on with our radar. My backseater's name was Jeff Feinstein. Jeff went on to become an ace, a backseat ace during the war, but this was his first victory. But we chased, at least where we thought that he had gone, into the cloud for a period until I couldn't stand it any longer. In North Vietnam, you did not want to be in a cloud because you couldn't see the missiles coming, the ground-to-air missiles. That was the only way you could defeat a SAM missile fired at you, was to be able to see it quickly and then turn to defeat it, its turn radius. So being in a cloud is like a death trap. You don't want to do that. But pretty aggressive in trying to wait a bit in the cloud anyway to see if we could pick up a radar contact on the MiG. Decided it was not going to work, and so pulled out on top and started to turn back to join my leader again and offer mutual support when we spotted Hong Mi about 2 o'clock high, about 3,000 or 4,000 feet above us. Went into birder, did a hard turn to try to position, fired 2 AIM-9 heat-seeking missiles. Both of them failed. Changed leads with my wingman, Greg Crane, who fired 3 AIM-7 missiles. All 3 failed to track properly. I took the lead back, was closing on the MiG at this point, feeling very confident in terms of position, and was able to track him very easily, and my gun sight, told Jeff to lock it up, and right about that time, the gun sight indicated a radar lock on. And what had happened is one of the missiles from my wingman that were fired at Hong Mi had caused him to brake real hard into the missile, which dissipated almost all of his energy. And that's what made him vulnerable, really, to my attack. But anyway, I thought there was something wrong with my airplane because of my AIM-9 failure to fire successfully the AIM-9 heat seekers. So as I clamped down on the trigger for the radar missile shot, I was very surprised when the AIM-7 came out, did a little barrel roll, the rocket ignited, and it was headed way out in front of the MiG. And I thought, well, there's another one that's malfunctioned. But in reality, all it was doing was pulling lead on the MiG. And at about 4,000 feet, which is minimum range for the AIM-7 Sparrow, my missile impacted Hong Mi's right wing root. Blew the wing completely off the airplane. The airplane went into a very quick snap roll, and about the first time around, out popped his parachute. I had to aggressively maneuver my F-4 to the side to keep from flying right through his parachute, because what I remember most is that chute being in my face. So I moved the airplane over quickly, rolled it up, and Bud, you'll get a kick out of this. People ask me, what's going through your mind about then? And I'd heard so many stories about the greatest generation and all their victories and things, and many of our fighter pilots losing credit for a victory because nobody could confirm it. And I'm worried that nobody's going to confirm this. Anyway, first of all, I was determined for my backseater, Jeff, to see it. And of course, my wingman's right there with me. He saw everything. There wasn't any doubt, but that's funny how in a strange situation like that, things go through your mind. But that's really what I thought. But we flew by Hong Mi and his parachute. He was horizontally, not dangling like you might think someone, because we were going so fast, probably 550 or so, something like that. Went by him very close, within a couple of 100 feet. And then the next thought on your mind is getting home safely. Very low on fuel. We knew we didn't have dedicated tanker support, and we were a long way from home. So, and we still had a lot of enemy territory to fly over. The fact of the matter is, if we had been engaged by additional MiGs at that point, we would not have had enough fuel to safely engage again to protect ourselves. So it was kind of tense right then, being sure that we stayed together as a flight, and we got down somewhat low altitude and went as fast as we could, trying to conserve fuel to make it back to Udorm. Now, while all this is going on, my flight leader, Fred Olmsted, shot down one of the two silver ones that came in initially. So it was a great day for Basco flight. We all got home safe and sound. We celebrated a little bit in the officers' club that night. I wondered for a while what really happened to the MiG pilot, because I saw him so clearly in his parachute. But when you're in an environment like that, you don't dwell on things from one day to the next, because the very next day I was up flying another combat mission. You're more concerned about the present and the future than what happened yesterday. But we did celebrate. I wondered if, about the MiG pilot for an hour or two there, if he really lived. Did he have a family? All those personal questions. But then for 36 years, it was way on the back burner of my mind. So again, an exciting day for Basco flight. Not so exciting for Hong Mi. Would you like for me to describe his situation at that point, Dan?
Sure.
I can ask Hong Mi to do this as well. The MiG-21's ejection seat that has a mechanism that wraps around your arms to protect your arms from frailing in the slipstream when you come out of the cockpit. That part of the system failed, and as a result, Hong Mi's arms went out into the slipstream. Let me ask him to explain a little bit about his injuries and his parachute landing fall and what happened to him in the jungle.
Sau khi tôi đã tránh được khoảng 5 quả tên lửa, thì đến quả tên lửa thứ 6 Tôi bởi vì ở vị trí 6 giờ cho nên tôi không có cách nào tôi phát hiện ra và tôi đã trúng. Thế và khi tôi biết là máy bay của tôi trúng tên lửa thì tôi nhảy dù.
I must say that when you stay at your enemy 6 o'clock, what you could do was to shoot him down first. But if you stay at his 12 o'clock, you could do nothing but trying to escape from him. I was in that situation that day. I never had a chance to launch any missile. After being able to avoid 4 or 5 missiles, I could not see the last one, and I got hit by Dan Cherry. Then I felt my aircraft take a violent hit, and I ejected.
Khi tôi nhảy dù ra thì cái hệ thống bảo vệ tay của ghế dù không làm việc và tại thời điểm bắn ra khỏi máy bay thì tôi bị gãy cả hai tay từ trên trời luôn.
As soon as I ejected from the aircraft, there was a malfunction of the system, so the effect of the wind blast broke my both arms immediately.
Khi nhảy dù thì vì hai tay gãy cho nên tay tôi không điều khiển được dù. Thế và rơi xuống đất thì là tôi chỉ có nằm còng queo ở trong rừng á. Thế và lúc đấy thì tôi không sợ chết, nhưng mà tôi nghĩ là bây giờ nằm giữa rừng này mà hai tay gãy cả hai rồi thì chẳng may có con hổ nó nhảy ra thì tôi không biết là chạy đi đâu.
Okay. Even though my mind knew what to do in order to control the parachute, my both arms could not respond at all. As a result, my parachute drifted freely and I came down to the jungles. Later, when recalling the moment when I was laying down in the jungle, I felt my thought process were rather funny because at that time, the most thing I was concerned was that in case a tiger would jump out to kill me, what would I do?
Thank you. Thank you.
Dan, let's talk about your second meeting with Hong Mi.
Quý vị có biết không, trong lúc Dan đang uống rượu mừng cùng với bạn bè thì tôi đang chuẩn bị lên bàn mổ ở bệnh viện.
Did you know that meanwhile Dan Cherry were drinking champagne for his victory, I was about to be on the operation table.
Well, can you see why we're friends? I mean, our second meeting, and actually our first face-to-face meeting, took place in 2008 in Ho Chi Minh City, what used to be known as Saigon. I became involved in the in early 2000s with a project in Bowling Green, Kentucky called Aviation Heritage Park. And what we do, we've become an educational facility where we restore aviation artifacts that represent the real stories about real aviators from our part of the country. And on just a happenstance trip to the Air Force Museum, a group of my friends and I were made aware that the airplane I flew on April 16th, 1972, F4D number 550, was on display in a little town on the outskirts of Dayton, and it was in need of a new home. So to make a long story short, one thing led to another. We did establish Aviation Heritage Park in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The Air Force gave us permission to take possession of the airplane and to restore it back to its combat colors. And so in December of 2005, Phantom 550 rolled into Bowling Green, Kentucky on 2 flatbed trailers. Today, you can visit Phantom 550, restored in all of her glory as she continues to serve her country in Aviation Heritage Park to Bowling Green, so I invite you down to do that if you'd like. But anyway, the course of being reunited with my airplane was kind of emotional. I was glad to see it again, but it was in very bad shape in terms of just being neglected. Dirty, very much a victim of bird abuse. Tires were flat, Grass was growing up all around her. But it also caused me to remember and to truly think for the first time in 36 years what happened on April 16th. Questions about the fate of the MiG pilot kept coming up in my mind. Who was he? Did he really survive? Did he have a family? All those human questions. And so we decided, my group of friends and I, who are founders of the Heritage Park, decided that we would do some serious outreach to see what we could determine. In the course of doing that, we made contact with a young lady who's a television producer on Vietnam television. Her name is Yen, and she's the nightly news anchor for Vietnam. She also hosts a program called The Separation Never Seems to Have Existed. And it's much like an old program we had here in the United States called This Is Your Life. And they do video profiles on people who have been separated for whatever reason. And then on live national television, they record the reunion so that the live audience can experience the emotion of that. Well, she heard about my search to find out more about the MiG pilot. She thought that might fit her format, and she wrote me an email and asked me to write her a letter, tell her what I wanted to do and why. So I did that. I described the date, the time, and the place of the dogfight. I told her that I'd always been curious about his fate, whether he lived or died, and I wanted to know his name and whether or not he had a family, and I would love to make contact, and I asked her for her help. I never expected anything to happen from that email, but it was only 2 weeks later that I received an email from her. She said, "We have found the brave MiG pilot. We want you to come to Vietnam and meet him on national television." So I was pretty much blown away by that. I thought, first of all, well, it's too good to be true. It's a setup, it's a hoax, there's something wrong with this. But I consulted with a lot of friends and people, the U.S. Embassy included, and everybody encouraged me to accept the invitation, told me that the television show was definitely legitimate, very popular in Vietnam, and so in April of 2008, I found myself in Saigon. And that evening, went to the television studio. The anchor of the show, Yen, introduced me, asked me basic questions like why I was in Vietnam, what I hoped to accomplish, things like that. And then very dramatically, she introduced Nguyen Hong Mi. He stepped out from behind a curtain across the studio, across the television set. And my heart is beating 90 miles an hour. I wanted this meeting to go well. I wanted there to be a basis for friendship, and my intuition told me I was doing the right thing, but I really didn't know. He steps out, and as you can see, he's a very handsome man. Looked very much like a Vietnamese fighter pilot ought to look to me. He's wearing a ball cap now, but he doesn't. His head is totally shaved, but he was dressed in a business suit, and he came walking toward me with a pleasant look. He didn't have a smile, but it was a pleasant look, and I extended my hand. We had a very firm handshake, and Hong Mi said to me, "Welcome to my country. I'm glad to see that you're in good health, and I hope that we can be friends." And so that's how our friendship started, right there on that television show. After the show was over, he invited me to his home. He lives in Hanoi. And so we flew together on Vietnam Airlines from Saigon to Hanoi the next day. And that alone was an extremely emotional, surreal experience. Looking out on that same countryside that I had flown countless combat missions over, it all looked the same. But yet I'm shoulder to shoulder with a MiG-21 pilot. Pretty remarkable. But he invited me to have dinner in his home with his family, and we did that evening. A wonderful Vietnamese dinner prepared. I got to meet his son and his daughter. I also had the privilege of meeting his, at that time, his only grandchild. Hong Duc was his only grandson at that point in time in 2008. And he was celebrating on that very day his first birthday. And as soon as we approached Hong Mi's front door, his son came out holding Hong Duc. And Granddaddy grabbed him, you know, like grandfathers do. And I went over to see if I could establish some sort of communication with the little boy. And all of a sudden, Hong Mi handed me his grandson. And I was just amazed and emotionally touched by that in such a short period of time, the trust between the two of us had grown to the point where he would trust me to hold his only grandchild. But we had a wonderful time together, and then the following year, Hong Mi, at my invitation, came to our country. He was able to visit me in Kentucky, have dinner in my home, and we had a wonderful time in 2009 visiting the Sun and Fun Fly-In in Lakeland, and then our nation's capital, where we were guest speakers at the Smithsonian Air and Space Magazine. So again, the friendship has grown, it's real, and each time we get to see each other, which is no more than once a year, it's great to renew a very solid friendship, and as expected, we have far more in common than we ever did differences.
I told you this was a good story. Remember I told you also that Hong Mi shot down an F-4 Phantom? Well, Dan's got a little surprise for us.
Yes, and Hong Mi can tell a little bit of this story too, but before he does, in January of 1972, Hong Mi was victorious over an American RF-4. As a result of that victory, he proudly wears his nation's highest combat award called the Ho Chi Minh War Medal, awarded only to those pilots who scored victories over enemy airplanes. And a part of the book, My Enemy, My Friend, one of the chapters is entitled The Double Full Circle. As I left Vietnam in 2008, as we were saying goodbye to each other after our very first face-to-face meeting, he asked me to do some research for him. He said, "Remember when I explained my badge and that I had shot down an American airplane?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "You know, I think the American pilot was killed. If he was killed, I would like to extend my condolences to his family. If he is alive, I would like to meet him someday." And so I promised him I would do the research, and so all the way home, my mind is racing with all the things that had happened. That was the last 2 days. And as soon as I got home, I began the process of trying to determine who it was that Hong Mi shot down in January of 1972. My research was successful, determined that it was a reconnaissance version of the F-4 that he shot down. The pilot's name was Bob Mock. The weapons systems officer's name was John Stiles. And please help me in welcoming up here to the stage, Mr. John Stiles.
Welcome, John.
It's really been quite an adventure, and the story seems to have legs and keep growing and everything. But what a wonderful thing to discover who John was in this way, and to be there watching these two men have their first reunion, and then since 2009, watching that friendship grow has been remarkable. Now, John is here with us today thanks to the efforts of another gentleman. I'd like to ask Bob Noble to come forward. Bob was the helicopter crewman who pulled John Stiles out of the jungle back in January.
Welcome.
Bob flew for Air America for a number of years, and so, again, our list of friendships that this story has created continues to grow, but we're delighted with where we are with it. We're going to be giving a presentation at the museum tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock where John will be able to speak and tell the details of his remarkable ejection, evasion, and escape and rescue. It's really an incredible story unto itself. But again, the message that comes out of this story and this book primarily is the message of forgiveness and reconciliation, moving on from the past, and living life in the future and the present, not dwelling on the unpleasantness of the past. So again, we hope the details of this story are useful to you in your personal lives.
Doctor, would you ask Hong Mi for his final thought? Could he sum this up, please?
Câu chuyện nhỏ của 4 người chúng tôi thì quý vị đã nghe qua rồi. Nói chung là có rất nhiều điều thú vị và có rất nhiều điều muốn nói. Nhưng mà có lẽ là chương trình sẽ tiếp tục trong ngày mai. Còn hôm nay thì vì điều kiện thời gian có hạn cho nên là lần nữa xin chúc quý vị vui vẻ, hạnh phúc và dự một cái show tuyệt vời.
I think that there are still many interesting things about the story of four of us, but I would like to leave that surprise tomorrow. Please join us.
Can I say one more thing? Dan mentioned my book, My Enemy, My Friend, that we'll be autographing in the gift shop earlier. And when Hong Mi first came to the United States in 2009, I had just published the book, and I wanted him to have one of the first copies. And so as he arrived, and after that long trip from Vietnam, we went to the hotel. I gave him a copy of the book and told him it was for him, and I hope he enjoyed it, and that sort of thing. I knew at that point that he reads English quite well, so I was hoping he would read it and like the book. Well, the next morning, I met him at the hotel. We had a busy week ahead of us, and the first question I asked him as we were having breakfast was, "How did you like the book?" And he said, "I didn't like it." Well, you can imagine how I felt by that, but I didn't pursue that. I just dropped it, changed the subject, went on to something else because I wanted our visit here in the United States to go well. I didn't want to start off on a negative note, but so I just dropped the subject. But just before he left, when he was leaving to get on to the airplane to fly back to Vietnam, I had to bring the subject up again. And I said, "Hong Mi, you know, when you first came, you said you didn't like my book." And I said, I wonder why you didn't like it. He said, "Oh, no, Dan, I didn't mean that I didn't like your book. I meant that I just don't like the title because I don't think you and I were ever really enemies. We were just soldiers. We were just soldiers doing the best we could for our countries."
I'd like to recognize, that ain't gonna work. I'd like to recognize Connie Boland. She's the founder and director of Warbirds in Review right there. I'd like to make one last comment I made last year when we talked to Bob Hoover, and this is true. These guys didn't fight for any dictator or any government, any politician. They fought for each other, and they fought for their country, and that's a fact. And I've noticed things about all fighter pilots. They have certain things in common. They love their country, they have a great sense of humor, and they're all wonderful gentlemen, just like these two guys here.